So we'll take this opportunity. First off, thank you for joining us today, either in person or online. We'll first take the opportunity to let ourselves settle into a comfortable space. Whatever activities we've been doing this morning, whatever running around, whatever traveling, whatever interactions with our family, whatever we've been doing, we can put that aside for the moment and let ourselves focus on our opportunity to study the Dharma more deeply, to encourage our practice. Now, a big part of these sessions, right? These are the happiness sessions, how to be happy, what is practical Buddhist advice for how to live every day. And realistically, our goal is not to say, now I'm going to practice Dharma, and then now I'm going to go about the rest of my life, right? Our goal is to integrate. But in order to do that, we have to do the work to develop a Dharma mind more active. And so when you attend a teaching, whether it's online or in person, we take the time to really focus and put the outside world away for a moment so we can focus on the teaching and on the opportunity to study and practice Dharma. So as we do that, let's set a strong motivation. The reason we are coming together today is to study the teachings of the Buddha and to learn how to incorporate those teachings into our everyday life so that we might find happiness for ourselves and for others. And because of this, we're practicing not just for our own worldly happiness, but so that we might develop the skills, the wisdom, the techniques in order to be of maximum benefit to others. So that we might become fully complete Buddhas, which will give us the maximum benefit to other sentient beings. So even though we appreciate that we'll find our own happiness as part of the journey, the real motivation is to help others. We learn how to tame our mind, how to find contentment and relaxation and insight, not for our own benefit alone, but for those of others, for that of others. So set the firm motivation that the reason we're gathered together today is so that we might learn how to be of more benefit to others. And as we try to hold that motivation firmly, we will offer some preliminary prayers. So in the prayer book on page 34, we'll offer the Refuge of Bodhicitta 3 times in Tibetan, once in English. And then we'll offer the remaining prayers on these pages. Sangye Churan Soki Chonam La Chanchu Parun Dagni Kapsu Chi Dagi Jinsogi Pesonam Gi Jola Pincher Sangye Drul Par Shok Sangye Churan Soki Chonam La Chanchu Parun Dagni Kapsu Chi Dagi Jinsogi Pesonam Gi Jola Pincher Sangye Drul Par Shok Sangye Cheran Soki Shonam La Chanchu Bardu Dagni Kapsu Ji Dagi Jinsogi Pe Sonam Gi Jola Pincher Sangye Drupar Sho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness from the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. And so we will offer a mandala to request the teaching, the blessings of all the Buddhas, as well as we offer mandalas to request teachings. So on the part of the students, request teachings, and on the part of all of us to request the blessings of the Buddhas. We'll do this once in Tibetan and once in English. Om Sakhi Jo Xing Me To Tram Ri Ram Ling Shi Ni De Gen Pa Di Sange Shing Nu Mi Te U Ai Roku Namanda Shing La Shipasho. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. Let's continue with offering praise to Shakyamuni Buddha on page 73 of this book. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, teacher of gods and supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, and all aspects. With supreme faith, I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, An illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See, condition things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the ways of aging, sickness, and death. Great. Thank you. So as we continue in our Sunday classes, I have to admit, when I was thinking of what I wanted to discuss today, I was being a little selfish because at the monastery, our activities, our academic year started up again. And so all of a sudden, very busy, all of a sudden, all over again, going to class every day, going to debate and so forth. And so what I wanted to talk about is that, we live lives that are so busy and we're overwhelmed with all the different things we do, whether it be work, whether it be school, whether it be family, whether it be our hobbies, all of these different things. We're constantly multitasking, doing so many things. And many of those things may be virtuous or they may be required for our daily living, right? But my question is, when I fill my time so much with all these things, where is the space for Dharma? Am I actually practicing Dharma just because I'm going through these motions? And when I'm busy, when I'm overwhelmed, have I edged out all the space for Dharma? So that is what I wanted to think about and talk about, this idea of what it means to be overwhelmed, to feel busy, to feel like I have no free time. And in so doing, have I said, well, my Dharma practice will happen once a week when I go to the temple, or maybe in the 20 minutes in the morning when I meditate, but is that my only Dharma practice? So where is the space for Dharma practice? I think what is especially true with Dharma, it's true for many things, especially true with Dharma, is we get what we give out of it, right? So if we don't put in the work to practice Dharma, then we don't receive the benefits. And that's not a matter of judgment and not a matter of anyone withholding anything from us. But since we are responsible for our own minds, if we don't do the work, then we're not going to have any results, right? You can buy all the best gym equipment in the world. If you don't get on it, you're not going to get into shape, right? So it's the same with the Dharma. We get what we give. And so we need to develop ways both to have what I like to think of as a long-term plan for our practice, but also a short-term everyday plan, right? So a long-term plan, and I don't mean in the idea of we want to become Buddhists. Yes, that's the long-term plan. Become Buddhists to help all sentient beings. But I mean realistic long-term plans for our everyday life. Like I want to be able to develop my meditation this month. I want to be able to practice in this way. I want to attend these teachings. I want to study these texts. Develop a long-term idea of what our goals are, right? But we have to develop also a plan to get through every single day. So we have to do both of these things. We have to combine a long view with the immediate. And we can't let the bigger picture let us forget or cause us to forget what's right in front of us, right? So we need to think of what kind of short-term practices or short-term plans can we do so that we are practicing every day, every moment, that we're trying to make the Dharma alive in everything we do, okay? And so what I think about is the different practices I can bring into my worldly life, whether that means when I'm studying, when I'm working, when I'm doing any of these things. How can I take those what practices can I have at hand right away, right? To make sure that what I'm doing is Dharma and is benefiting me. And so the first thing, the first thing that I think is really important, and we start every session with it, but it's easy to forget, is intention. Setting strong intentions is really powerful, right? Our mind and our mental actions are the most powerful actions that we do. And throughout our day, whenever we start a new task, if we just take 30 seconds to be very clear in setting an intention with that new task, it's a really powerful practice. And we get so used to moving from one task to another that we don't think about it. Even if we do have our best of intentions, where we start the day, we meditate, we say, okay, everything I do today for the benefit of sentient beings. That's a great way to start the day. It's powerful, important. But then you make breakfast, and then you see your family, and then you go do some chores, and then you go to work. And all of a sudden that motivation, it's maybe there in the background, right? But it's easy to not make it present. So we want to make it present. We want to make it active. So if we can get into the habit whenever you switch to a new task, even the mundane, silliest task, okay, I'm done eating breakfast. Now I'm going to wash the dishes. Whatever that task is, say, I'm going to try to do this with a bodhicitta attitude. I'm going to try to set a motivation that what I'm doing now is to tame my mind so I can develop compassion and love for all sentient beings with the goal to free them from suffering. Right? Even if it's a mundane task, whatever it may be, try to make every task Dharma. So that's the first thing I like to try to bring in. And I don't do it successfully. I'm going through so many things. And I think of, I have to study this text to prepare for class. I have debate. I'm doing outwardly very Dharma activities, studying Dharma texts. But I don't always take the time to say, okay, why am I doing this? And I think that's true for all of us, right? So that's the first thing I think we can bring into our everyday practice more fervently, is setting a motivation. Not just in the morning, not just once, but really try to do it with every single task we do. Then the next one, the flip side of setting an intention, is rejoicing. And I talk about rejoicing a lot. I think, you don't always hear it talked about as much by many of the teachers, but Lama Zopa Rinpoche was very, very keen on rejoicing. And I think many of his students, because of that, realize the benefits of it or feel it very keenly. I think rejoicing is incredibly powerful when so much of our experience is looking at how we aren't doing good enough. We aren't Buddhas yet, right? That there's more I have to do, that I have to get better. I have to decrease my afflicted minds. I have to be more magnanimous. I have to be more open, more compassionate. And these are all true things. We want to develop our minds in this way. But we need to rejoice in those successes that we have and the successes of people around us. That's part of what, never mind the whole karma part of it. We say that rejoicing in others' good virtue accumulates the same amount of merit for us. If we never mind the kind of merit calculus, just that act of rejoicing itself, creating a mind that finds joy in virtue and finds joy in good deeds, propels us forward on our path. A mind that celebrates our own victories and the victories of others encourages us to continue our practice, right? And so we need to really work on that. I have a hard time doing it because I'm always wanting to improve. I always want to be better. So it's hard to say, okay, I did a good job at this thing, right? So we need to get better at that. And we're not, just patting ourselves on the back just for the sake of it. What we're doing is saying, it is hard to live in samsara. It's easy to be overwhelmed by suffering. So any step towards freedom from suffering that I can take is a huge revolutionary step. So I'm going to rejoice in every victory I get because I know that I'm also sliding back, that I know I have negative minds. I know that I'm still, overwhelmed by my anger and my ignorance and my desire all the time. And I'm working on it. So the fact that I'm working on it is profound. So we set our intention repeatedly and we rejoice often, repeatedly throughout the day. Whenever we succeed in doing something, we should rejoice. Or when we see someone else succeed or have some joy. And then the last thing I want to try to encourage us to bring into our everyday practice more fervently is compassion. And I know this is obvious. These are all obvious, but it's worthwhile mentioning, right? Compassion, the wish for others not to suffer or to have any other cause of suffering. It's so easy to go about our day and get frustrated. It's a perfect example, right? So
this is what happens.
For those of us, I don't know if those who are online, there's a lot of background noise happening on the street right now, which is what we are smiling about. I think right now, especially with the state of the world and the kind of very divisive and politics of anger that are governing many societies right now, both at a political level, but also as a social level, that it's easy to lose sight of compassion. And that compassion isn't just hoping that my friends and family are okay. It's recognizing that all sentient beings are suffering and all sentient beings should be free from suffering. And so when we look at people that are enacting harmful practices towards others, we should have compassion for the people that are affected by their harm, but also have compassion for the people that are engaging in harmful actions. We have to recognize that they're engaging those actions out of their own suffering, right? And their misunderstanding of what is suffering and what is happiness. All sentient beings want to be free from suffering. All sentient beings want happiness, but we spend our lives not understanding which is which. We chase after suffering, thinking it'll bring us happiness. That's what's happening when people harm others, right? They think this is going to make me happy. This is going to solve my problems, whatever they may be. And so all they're doing is creating more problems for themselves and more suffering in the immediate and also the long term. So being able to bring compassion into our every moment is the most transformative aspect of the Mahayana path. And it's also the most difficult, I think, or one of the most difficult, because it feels so counterintuitive. And it feels like we're giving up when we say, I'm trying to have compassion for those who cause me harm or cause others harm. Compassion isn't, passive acceptance. It isn't letting yourself be steamrolled. It's recognizing that people act out of anger and out of suffering, having compassion for that. And if that means standing up against their violence or their harmful actions, then standing up against it, right? It's not saying that we let it happen, but it is recognizing that no one is acting out of a place of joy when they're harming others. Even if they seem to be joyful, they're acting out of suffering. So trying to bring compassion into our everyday life is important. And sometimes it's easy when you see, a hungry animal on the street, it's easy to wish them they weren't suffering, right? When you see gross examples of suffering, it's very easy to use that as an opportunity to practice compassion. So that should be the baseline. And we should use that as our example. If it's that easy, when I see some animal or some other sentient being, even a human, who is suffering in some way, some coarse suffering, it's so easy, right? My compassion comes naturally. If it comes that naturally in that instance, why can't it come that naturally in all instances, towards all sentience, towards all suffering sentient beings? So we should work on developing it, right? And I think these three things are important ones for our everyday, the short term or the immediate practice. Setting intention repeatedly throughout the day, rejoicing throughout the day, and constantly looking at our actions and our reactions and seeing if they come through a motivation of compassion or through a motivation of our coarser emotions, right? Whether it be anger, whether it just be reaction, whether it be ignorance, whatever it may be. And, we often say the important part of Buddhism is that Buddhism is transforming the mind. So engaging in these actions may not change the physical actions we take throughout the day. We may still be running around. We may still be very busy. We may still be either protesting or whatever we may be doing. But we can do that with minds that are different, right? And by transforming our minds, then we are transforming our physical actions eventually. Like it's a process. So trying to create a short-term practice that incorporates these three specifically throughout the day, I think what we need to focus on, or what can help us rather, a tool, is developing mindfulness. And I know I've talked about that already in some of our Sunday classes. And I always feel like a little bit of a sellout because mindfulness is like, the base level practice, but it's so important that it's worth talking about again and again. And what I wanted to talk about a little bit is that when we talk about developing mindfulness, we usually discuss it in the context of developing calm abiding meditation or a mind of calm abiding. Okay, I don't know the mic situation. I don't know what's going on. But you can hear me, right? So we talk about developing calm abiding. And what I was thinking about is when we think of calm abiding, developing a mind of quiescence, we often say that there are 5 obstacles to developing the mind of calm abiding. And then there are these 8 antidotes to those obstacles. And so I wanted to think about how, first off, we can try to incorporate calm abiding and mindfulness through our everyday life and use it as a remedy when we're overwhelmed, when we're busy, when we feel like we are barely keeping things together. But I also want to think about the obstacles to mindfulness in general and how those obstacles manifest in other aspects of our life. And do the antidotes that we apply when we're sitting on a cushion, can we apply those antidotes to our everyday life? So, what are the 5 obstacles to developing calm abiding? It's okay. I know, I'm sorry. So the first obstacle is laziness, right? So we said there are 5 obstacles and there are 8 antidotes. The reason there are 8 antidotes is because the first obstacle, laziness, has 4 antidotes that work together to serve as the antidote. And then the other 4 obstacles each have 1 antidote each. So that's why it's 5 and 8. So the first obstacle, and this is the most important obstacle, or the heaviest obstacle, is laziness. And here it's laziness, whereas there's different types of laziness, right? There's the laziness that is just procrastination, which we all have. There's also the laziness, which is an attraction to engaging in non-Dharma activities. It's another type of laziness. And then there's the laziness of kind of putting yourself down and saying, well, I'm not good enough anyway, so I shouldn't bother practicing. So there's laziness of self-discouragement. These are all different types of laziness. We say that one type of laziness is actively engaging in non-Dharma activities is a type of laziness, because it is not allowing you to engage in Dharma, right? Whereas procrastination is just being lazy in general, which is our most common understanding of the term lazy. But if you're constantly attracted to non-Dharma activities, it has the same result of that, right? And the antidote is similar insofar as, in general, not regarding mindfulness practice, but in general, the antidote is developing perseverance and recognizing that our perseverance in practicing the Dharma is an antidote to that. So it's an attraction to non-Dharma activities, a type of laziness, constantly filling our lives with all of these little things to distract ourselves from actually working on our mind is a type of laziness. And so the good thing about us right now is the fact that we're here together and we are trying to study the Dharma and trying to practice is an indication that we've already taken some steps against that first obstacle of laziness, right? We're already moving towards it. But so there are 4 general antidotes that work together. And so they work in sequence to overcome our laziness. And this, right now, I'm talking about specifically in context of developing calm abiding, but then we'll talk about those in our everyday life as well. But let's get through the specific meaning of them in this context first. So the first antidote is faith or conviction. So this is faith or conviction, not like a blind faith, but a faith that this practice is actually meaningful. And that faith comes from our experience, from seeing others who have engaged in this practice, and we see their lives are more calm, they have more contentment, they have more joy in their lives, right? Or we might have some small experience of our own life that when I was doing this or when I've done this, I've seen some benefits in my life. So the first way to overcome that laziness is to have some sort of conviction that says, I know there's benefit here. I know there's utility in doing this, even if I don't do it all the time. But then once you develop that conviction or that faith, the next antidote, or the way you build that, is you develop an aspiration. So you develop the wish or the intention that I want to engage in this practice, right? So that you see it's the natural building of faith. First, you have conviction, and then you have the aspiration. And then you have the effort. That's the third antidote. You actually exert some effort towards doing it, whatever it may be. That might mean scheduling out time from your day. It might mean learning how to, if you want to have mindfulness meditation once an hour at work to kind of keep yourself, setting a timer so your phone goes off once an hour to remind you, I'm going to take 1 minute of mindfulness, whatever it may be, you're exerting some sort of effort. Okay? So you have conviction, aspiration, effort, and then the last one we call mental pliancy. So mental pliancy, there's 4 types of pliancy. There's the bliss of mental pliancy, the bliss of physical pliancy. Well, there's mental pliancy, physical pliancy, then the bliss of physical pliancy, and the bliss of mental pliancy. And these are all developed as we develop a mind of calm abiding. But mental pliancy, or suppleness, it's sometimes called, it's almost exactly what it sounds like, in that it's a willingness to be able to change and adapt to a situation without being overwhelmed by it, right? So letting your mind be able to adjust to whatever is going on. Being willing to roll with the punches, kind of, is pointing at what we mean by when we say mental pliancy. Physical pliancy, we develop through the practice of, actually it's developed through the practice of calm abiding, where our actual bodies become much more supple, you know? We're able to meditate longer without feeling pain in our bodies because we have actually overcome these mental and emotional blocks. And then the bliss of physical pliancy and the bliss of mental pliancy are, as those 2 minds develop, then instead of just being supple and malleable, there's actually a type of bliss that's associated with them. And the bliss of mental pliancy, we achieve the same time we actually achieve calm abiding. Like that's one of the signs of achieving calm abiding, is you've achieved this bliss. And it's described as being this incredible sensation, it's like really wildly blissful. But so the antidote we're talking about here is the coarsest one of those, and that is just mental pliancy. So after you've developed the conviction and the aspiration, and you've started exerting some sort of effort, through that effort, you develop a mind that is supple, that is able to roll with the punches. And that mind is the actual antidote to laziness, right? That mind that is saying, I am going to be attracted to Dharma regardless of the difficulties that arise. That when I'm overwhelmed, instead of letting myself be distracted, I have the capacity to transform that into a practice, right? That suppleness, that mental pliancy is the actual antidote to our laziness. But we use the first three to build up to developing that, right? So that's the first obstacle to developing a mind of calm abiding and the four antidotes that go with it. Now, the next obstacle is it's called forgetting the instruction. What it means is when you're meditating, forgetting the object of your meditation, whatever it may be. So in our practice, it's often the breath, right? Or it's a visualization of the Buddha or something like this. So it's called forgetting the instruction, but it means forgetting what you're doing, forgetting what you're focused on, right? And the way we overcome that is by developing mindfulness or remembering. You know, the word in Tibetan for mindfulness and the word for memory is the same word. So drenpa means to remember something. It also means mindfulness, depending on context. So the way we develop mindfulness is by constantly returning our attention to whatever object we're meditating on. So the obstacle to developing calm abiding is that we forget constantly. Now, once we have actually begun our practice and we are working at keeping our mind focused on whatever it is that we are meditating on, the next obstacle we encounter, there are two obstacles that work hand in hand. One is agitation or excitement, and the other one is dullness or lethargy. And so these can be understood in this context as the agitation being our mind is constantly running in circles. The monkey mind that can't stay still for a moment is constantly distracted. And then lethargy or dullness is the opposite. It's the mind that's sleepy, the mind that goes into torpor, that mind that can't focus because it just wants to fall asleep, basically. So those two minds are being overwhelmed by these different aspects of either agitation or excitement. And the antidote to that is what we call either awareness or introspection. So this goes hand in hand with mindfulness. If mindfulness is keeping our focus on whatever it is we're trying to meditate on, then awareness or introspection is helping it by paying attention to when we're distracted. So introspection is like it's considered a mental factor, but it's one that we try to have cultivating all the time, like running in the background all the time, and just paying attention. Wait, are you actually paying attention? Are you distracted? Do you have an external distraction that's getting in your way, or do you have an internal distraction? So that awareness isn't actually doing anything about it. It's just clocking what is going on in your mind, right? So it's trying to be aware. That's why often awareness or introspection are the terms. They often say mindfulness and awareness go hand in hand. So if you're trying to tame an elephant, they say, this is a very Indian example, but if you're trying to tame an elephant, first you have a post set in the ground that the elephant is tied to. That post is the mindfulness. So the elephant can't wander too far away because that post is keeping the elephant within a certain radius. In that same way, trying to really make sure we remember what it is we're focused on is like that post holding us in place, right? So we have some room to wander, but we can't get too far away. And then the introspection or the awareness is like the hook that you jab the elephant with, which is not really a pleasant image. But I suppose if you're training elephants in ancient India, that's how you do it, with hooks. But so our awareness is what's making sure we're staying in line, right? So one thing is keeping us connected, and the other is pushing us in the direction we need to go, or being aware when we step out of line. So awareness is the antidote to both agitation and dullness. And so then that awareness is just telling us, hey, you're not focused. Hey, you're distracted. Or hey, you're getting sleepy. So then the next obstacle is not applying the antidote. So when you are aware of being distracted or being lethargic, not then doing something about it is an obstacle. And the antidote to that is actually applying the antidote, which we'll talk about in a second. And because the next one is the over application of the antidote. So whatever the antidote is, if you just keep applying it, then you go too far to the other side. You haven't found a balance. And then the remedy to that is to stop applying. So the last two are very self-explanatory. Once you realize something is wrong, doing nothing about it, then what do? Then you do something about it. And then as you're doing something about it, if you go too far, not stopping, then you stop and you pull back. So, well, so the problem is we think of dullness and excitement as kind of two ends of like a continuum. I'm trying to think of like a seesaw, like something with a pivot in the middle, like a lever in the middle. If you, the way you overcome anxiety, not anxiety, the way you overcome excitement, for instance, is by trying to relax, right? And if you go too far, you fall into lethargy and you become lethargic. In the same way, the trying to overcome lethargy is you tighten your grip. But if you don't stop, then you move too far and you go into excitement. So they kind of counteract each other, but you have to find that balance between them. And one of the things that I like about this, which is also a frustrating thing about these teachings, is that the way you overcome lethargy and excitement, the instructions are super vague. And I remember a student asking me, are these just vague because like the teachers that teach it in the West and the English language is vague? And you said, no, it's vague in all of them. So like when they say like, how do you overcome lethargy? They say, tighten up your visualization. I'm like, what does that mean? How do you tighten your visualization? You're visualizing something. What does it mean to tighten? But they say you're trying to focus, right, to overcome lethargy. So you're exerting more effort to try to overcome this dullness, this torpor. And so whatever it is you're focusing on, you try to make it more vivid. You try to brighten it. You try to do these things that are very analogous to what we do if we're feeling sleepy in our everyday life. So you think of the experience of feeling sleepy. What do you do to try to overcome that? It's very similar in our meditation practice. You try to make things more intense, more tight, more like a rubber band that's stretched, right? Has more potential. That's what you're trying to do, to the extent where you're trying to overcome the sleepiness. But then when it gets to be distraction, then you're trying to relax, because part of our distraction, it may come from external things. It's obviously a distraction. And there's not much we can do about those external things except that we don't chase after. But then our internal distractions is when we have all these thoughts jumping. Part of what we have to do then is relax our grip on whatever it is we're meditating, which can feel counterproductive. If I'm constantly distracted and I want to focus on my breath, to relax my grip a little bit seems like I'm going in the wrong direction. But the problem is when you're exerting so much effort, it's like ready to explode. You have to relax it a little bit to allow yourself to fall into the rhythm of not forgetting the object, right? You still want to always be aware of the object, whether it's your breath or a visualization, whatever it may be. But if you're constantly gripping so tight and white knuckling it, you are kind of creating these additional distractions for yourself, right? So I love that the teachings in this are so vague, because it's hard to understand what it means, but it gives you space to try to play with it a little bit, right? To find your way. I also just like that so much of the teachings are so detailed and specific that these use this kind of vague language. It shows that it's a hard thing to put in a language, and that we have some experience of it. I think especially the experience of when we're tired, we know the things we do to wake ourselves up, just in a very worldly sense. So if we then use that experience to apply to our meditation is helpful. And we also know that when we're overwhelmed and we're very agitated, some of the things we do to calm our minds down, we can do a similar thing in this. So we can use our worldly experiences and then try to apply them to our meditation. So those are the 5 obstacles to achieving calm abiding and the 8 antidotes. And so I want to think a little bit about our everyday life. Where do these obstacles come in? And how do we apply similar antidotes? So first, laziness, I think, is very obvious, right? That laziness comes in, all my day is pervaded by laziness. And I won't speak for anyone who's listening to this, but from my side, laziness is there all the time. Even when I am studying, even when I'm doing the work, there's always part of me that's saying, I could be doing something else right now, right? Like I could be using this time to, never mind, take a nap, which it often feels like I need more of. I will say, being around Tibetans, it becomes really easy to be fond of naps, because Tibetans like naps. At least when they came to India, they weren't used to the weather in India. And it was so hot, they fell into this habit of taking naps. So many monasteries, everything from about 11:30 to 2:30 is just closed, because all the Tibetans are taking afternoon naps. Many of the stores closed. The offices are closed, because it's nap time. And I'm not good at napping, so I often am doing work during that time. And there are many of my classmates as well. But being around Tibetans, you do get used to napping. But napping isn't the same thing as laziness. Napping is often recognizing that you're working yourself very hard. So you need to take care of your body in a way that's meaningful to give you the energy to continue, right? Especially if you're debating until 11 p.m. at night, then you're getting up at 5 a.m. to do more recitation. You have to be able to take care of your body. So it doesn't have to be laziness. I mean, it probably is with me, but with others, it isn't always laziness. So then more important than understanding laziness, I think we can identify laziness. If we take a step back from our everyday activities, we can identify laziness, both the laziness of procrastination, but also the laziness of distracting ourselves by doing unimportant tasks to avoid the important task, right? Like we know we have to do this one big thing. And so instead of doing that, we're going to do everything else except for that thing. Or we just say, well, I'm not good enough, so I'll do that thing eventually once I develop more skills. Those are all, at least in my experience, very, very easy to identify. So the way to overcome that, again, now we're talking about not just in meditation, but on everyday life, is these 4 antidotes to laziness: faith or conviction, then aspiration, then effort, and then a type of pliancy or malleability, right? So I want to think about how we bring conviction into our everyday lives. When we are facing an obstacle, what can conviction do for us? The recognition that I have confidence that doing this thing is beneficial for me or for others, even if it's a thing I don't want to do, whether it be a worldly task, or especially in the case of trying to apply a Dharma mind to my everyday life. I have confidence that if I can make my Dharma practice more integrated with my everyday practice, it'll be beneficial, even if that is difficult. So just developing that conviction, right? Not just conviction that meditation is useful, not just conviction that the teachings of the Buddha are valid, but conviction that the more I integrate my Dharma practice with every aspect of my life, the more benefits I will see for myself and others. Trying to develop conviction in that then makes it easier to practice. So then once you develop that conviction, and then comes aspiration. So once we have some confidence that this is useful, then we start looking for motivation to do it more often. And from there, we exert effort. So that's the next step. We're able to actually see, what does it mean to try to bring mindfulness, to bring compassion, to bring a strong motivation, to bring rejoicing into my everyday experience? What kind of effort can I do? So, like I said, it could be as simple as setting a phone alarm every 2 hours to say, I'm going to take 1 minute of mindfulness every 2 hours while I'm at work or where I'm doing whatever I'm doing, or I'm going to exert the effort that whenever I begin a new task, I really am going to just take a minute, set a motivation, and to make sure I'm doing that task not mindlessly, but intentionally, even if it's a really boring task, right? So that is exerting some sort of effort. And then that suppleness, I think, in our everyday life is very much being loose enough to roll with the punches, to realize that our Dharma practice can sustain us through anything. So it doesn't matter what we're doing. Dharma can be incorporated into every single activity we do. Sometimes it's more difficult. Sometimes it's easier. I've talked a lot about engaging in pop culture and these things that we use to relax and trying to do it with Dharma mind. And last night, one of the students said, I was trying to do that, but I was watching the new season of The White Lotus, which is a TV show on HBO. And he's like, it was very hard to try to bring Dharma experience into watching The White Lotus. The White Lotus is about incredibly rich people at a resort behaving really badly. And I was like, it is, but at the same time, they're a perfect example of what it means to have your life motivated by greed and by wealth and believing that all these external things are happy for you and are going to bring you happiness. And the whole point of a TV show is that it doesn't bring them happiness. That's why it's amusing to us to see these rich people not get, to experience difficulties in their life. So in that case, it's good to meditate on. Look, their whole lives are motivated by their greed and their desire, and they're not happy. Yet they have all this money and they're chasing it, but it's making them miserable. Even though they're set at a beautiful resort in Thailand, like everything is wonderful, yet they're miserable, right? So you can bring a Dharma mind even to something as mundane as watching an hour of TV in the evenings with your family, even if it is really, well, I wouldn't say that's crass TV, but it is very, it plays up on the senses, the sensory expectations. But so this is a type of suppleness to say that no matter my situation, I can find a way to apply a Dharma reasoning, a Dharma experience to this situation. That I don't only have to practice Dharma when it is convenient, right? And that comes from developing conviction, aspiration, putting in effort. And those are all ways to overcome our laziness in our regular practice. Now, forgetting our motivation, forgetting the instruction, forgetting the focus, I think is also something that comes in our everyday life. because we fill our space and our time with non-Dharma, it is easy to forget that we have committed ourselves to practicing the Dharma. And so trying to remember the instruction is really, really powerful and important. So once we have developed some level of a suppleness, a malleability of mind, a recognition that I can engage in Dharma all the time, then we have to work on actually doing that, staying focused on the Dharma. So whatever we're doing, try to take our mind back to the real goal, whatever it may be, right? Maybe it is just developing compassion. Maybe it is working to overcome certain obstacles, whether they be afflicted minds or things like this, right? Trying to bring our awareness back to our goal, the main goal. And, you know, we see this often in worldly experiences. How often have we had to do something, whether it be for work or for our job, where we know what the end goal is, but there's a lot of drudge work to get there. And the way you get to that drudge work and that difficult, really boring, monotonous work is, see, like, I have my eyes on the prize. Like, I know what I want to do. And I know that the way to get there is to get through this really boring, monotonous thing. So we have this experience of saying, as long as I'm focused on the end result, I can go through the swamp. I can go through the difficult work and not get bogged down by it because I'm letting myself stay focused on the goal, right? So instead of letting that goal just be, you know, I'm willing to go to the gym every day because my goal is to have a healthy body, and I'm willing to, like, you know, put myself through this like labor and this difficulty at the gym. If we can do that for things as silly as our appearance and our body, even though having a healthy body isn't silly, but you know what I mean, then of course we could say my goal is to become Buddha. So of course I'm willing to go through the effort of experiencing difficulty and of doing hard work and of applying difficult concepts to my everyday life, or trying to, because my goal is the complete permanent bliss of Buddhahood, the freedom from all suffering for myself and for all those sentient beings. What wouldn't I do to become Buddha, right? And then we get to, how do agitation and dullness affect our everyday life, and how can we counteract them? And how specifically does the idea of relaxing your grip on something, how is that something useful in our everyday life? And how is the idea of intensifying your focus benefit our everyday life? And so that's part of the reason I like the vagueness of these antidotes, that again, it goes with this idea of malleability, right? Of understanding that no matter what we're doing, we can find a way to make this meaningful. And if what we're doing is causing us distress, then we have to find a way to relax on it and to not let it cause us distress. Okay? So we can't grip onto things too tightly. We have to hold them tight enough that they don't float away, right? So that's where our focus comes in. We want to keep them in our periphery, in our view. But if we grab onto them too tightly, we're only going to be harming ourselves, and we're only going to be exerting effort in the wrong direction. And this goes for our relationships, this goes for our work, this goes for our worldly goals. All these things are important to have and important to nurture, important to take care of. But if we hold on to them as being the sources of our happiness, the sources of our well-being, then we're strangling, right? And we're not letting them grow or us grow. We're holding it back. So we have to find that balance of relaxing into things, but not so relaxed that we don't care about it, right? We don't want to be indifferent. We're not aiming for indifference. We're aiming for contentment. Contentment and indifference aren't the same. Contentment is recognizing that no matter the situation, whether there be obstacles and difficulties, or whether there be joys and celebrations, my mind isn't going to have these wild fluctuations. That whatever comes, I'm able to deal with it in a healthy way. And I can appreciate those wonderful things that happen. When bad things happen, I can find a way to overcome them. And neither of them are going to hold me back. Neither of them are going to wildly upset me. That's contentment. Indifference is saying, I don't care about anything. It doesn't matter. So indifference is leading towards nihilism, right? And it doesn't encourage healthy practice. It doesn't encourage healthy relationships. So, and then the last two, obstacles and antidotes, I think are very clear. So when we do develop some technique of not holding on to things too tight, we notice that we've let it go too far, we have to pull ourselves back in. And in the same way, if we've been too relaxed and we try to exert effort, we get too uptight about things, we have to pull back. So it's all about finding balance of saying, how can I find how to bring Dharma into my everyday life and how to hold on to those experiences in a way that make me grow as a person, are constantly pushing myself out of my comfort zone, but aren't leaving me stranded on an island by myself. That is always moving in the same direction, but isn't so tense all the time. And so for me, a lot of this comes back to, well, first off, I'll say that when we think of developing a mind of calm abiding, so by practicing mindfulness meditation in a very focused way, we can take those techniques that we practice into our everyday life, into other circumstances, right? Which is one of the reasons we practice. Obviously we practice mindfulness so we can be more aware of our mind. We can be more aware of what's actually going on when we're being ruled by our emotions. That's one of the most important parts of mindfulness. But also it's giving us techniques that we can then apply to our everyday life. When I get used to understanding what it means to relax into something or to tighten my grip, when I get used to developing a mind of introspection that's always paying attention to what am I distracted by? What am I leaning towards? What am I overwhelmed by? When I have the habit of creating that mind or of giving that mind some power, then it comes into my everyday life as well. So mindfulness isn't just about being able to focus and calm our minds. It's also giving us a whole suite of tools that are like running in the background that we can apply to other activities. So that's part of the reason I think mindfulness practice is so important. Yes, it gives us a chance to see our minds, to see it when we're overwhelmed by our emotions, but it also gives us a technique to relate to reality in a way that's healthy. And we also can think that when we develop calm abiding, or when we work to develop calm abiding, the goal of calm abiding really is it's a stepping stone towards developing special insight. All right. So calm abiding or shamatha is a stepping stone to develop vipassana, so special insight. Right? So special insight is a type of wisdom that is able to analyze and understand whatever object it is perceiving in a direct and unmediated way. That's what special insight is. Next, on the Buddhist path, special insight first is conceptual, right? And then it's direct. So we have different levels of realization. But the point is, the mindfulness itself isn't the goal. Mindfulness is a technique and a tool to bring us somewhere else, right? So since we're so distracted all the time, it's really important to focus on mindfulness because it is really hard for us. But we have to realize that mindfulness isn't an end in and of itself. It's a technique to bring us somewhere else. It's a technique to develop wisdom, because wisdom is the real key here. Having wisdom to analyze what am I doing and how am I affecting myself and the world around me, and then the wisdom to know when to apply action in one way or another is what's most important. The way we develop that is through meditation. Meditation, but through mindfulness, right? Because if we don't, calm abiding itself is the ability to focus our mind on any object of meditation single pointedly without any effort. When we actually develop calm abiding. And he says, I want a single focus to meditate on impermanence. Okay, I'm doing it right now. I don't have to get into a zone. I don't have to do any preamble. The ability to focus your mind exactly on any object. So then when you're trying to develop insight, special insight, Lekden in Tibetan, vipassana, we call it special insight, but the word pashyana and in Tibetan tong has to do with seeing, like a special type of seeing, a special recognition, right? Developing that involves the ability to really focus on a problem, right? Really focus on whatever it is you're meditating on if you're trying to understand the nature of reality, or if you're trying to focus on compassion and how compassion works. So developing special insight, and again, special insight itself isn't an end, it's another tool. Because when we're able to understand the nature of reality more clearly, then we can act in a more healthy way. So both of these things, mindfulness and special insight, are tools that we cultivate to bring us closer to Buddhahood and freedom from suffering. So we have to always, at least for me, it's always useful to remember mindfulness and keep it in this context. That is an incredibly powerful tool that I am strengthening because it's going to bring me somewhere else. It's not my end goal, just to be able to sit in meditation for as long as I want. Like that'd be great. And that's what they say, the beings who achieve the Hinayana arhats, so they achieve the ability that they have gotten rid of the self-grasping mind, and they've gotten rid of their own suffering. So they achieve nirvana, like what's called the Hinayana nirvana. And they engage in this meditative equipoise that lasts, millennia. But they still have to be awakened from that to join the Bodhisattva path, to become full Buddhas, right? to work for the benefit of others. So just resting in meditation can't be an end goal. It's a technique, it's a tool, it's useful. And since our lives are so distracted, it's necessary because we have to find a way to develop that muscle. But it isn't our goal, or it isn't the main goal, right? So then bringing that all back to the very beginning, I think what's important to ask myself is, why am I so busy? We say our lives are overwhelmed with all these tasks. I'm running around all the time, and some of those are conceptually out of my control. Like there are certain responsibilities I have, right? That my day I have to accomplish these certain tasks, whether they be for work or for family or for school or for what other obligations I have. But the sense of being overwhelmed and busy doesn't come necessarily from those tasks. It comes from my mind and the way I relate to those tasks, right? And how much of my experience of being overwhelmed is something I've created for myself? How much of it is something that is avoidable if I choose to avoid it, or if I choose not to distract myself? Now, again, not everything is avoidable. We live in the world. We have responsibilities. But we can look at our responsibilities and say, how much of my emotional labor am I putting into this that is causing me to be distracted, distressed, and feeling like I'm always burnt out? And how much of it isn't necessary? How can I still accomplish these tasks with a mind that doesn't feel like it's always on the edge? And since we often don't have control, if we do have control over some of our tasks, then that's one thing, right? If I know that I'm doing these things and I can cut down, then that is one thing. And we should apply appropriate antidotes as necessary. But when I don't have that option, maybe the tasks are assigned to me or whatever, then we have to say, what is it about my relationship to all of these worldly activities that is causing such stress? It's causing such anxiety. It's causing this feeling of constant overload. And how can I bring in mindfulness as well as the other techniques to lighten that emotional labor, to make the emotional work easier, even if I can't change the physical activities, right? How can I avoid the burnout, even if I can't avoid the actual physical activities? So this comes into, how can I create a daily routine of bringing Dharma into my life all the time, not just in the evenings or in the mornings or once a week when I come to the temple? The Tibetan word for meditation, I say this all the time, is gom. It means to become familiar, right? When we meditate, what we're doing is becoming familiar with our minds. What we're doing is becoming indivisible. We're creating an indivisibility between our minds and whatever it is we're meditating, whether that be compassion or whether that be any other positive, virtuous mind. We're trying to create an indivisibility. So what we want to accomplish is we don't want to have to think about engaging in Dharma. We want to do the work in meditation practice explicitly so that during our day, our natural instinct is to follow a Dharma mind, whatever that may be. Right? Our natural instinct should be one of compassion. Our natural instinct should be one of seeing joy, seeing virtue and rejoicing. We shouldn't have to go through the process of saying, oh, that person is suffering, I feel bad. And right now we do. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because we're growing, we're developing. But the goal is to not have to be so cognizant of it, to make it our second nature. And that is why we have explicit meditation practice, to make ourselves familiar with these virtuous actions, to make ourselves familiar with our own minds in such a way that we can incorporate our spiritual practice and our worldly practice so there is no divisibility. That I don't have to say, okay, how am I going to make this activity a spiritual activity? We do it automatically, right? We bring our mindfulness, our awareness, our concentration, our intention to benefit others into everything we do without having to exert effort because we've done all the effort. That's the goal. So the reason, it's not the reason we meditate, but it is one of the reasons we meditate, is that we want to be able to apply a Dharma solution or a Dharma perspective to all of our daily activities. And we want that to be a habit that we cultivate to such an extent that we don't have to think about it anymore. There's a very you hear a lot the slogan like, what would the Buddha do, or what would Jesus do? Right? You ask yourself through this, right? It came with WWJD, is how it was started, at least in America. What would Jesus do? And then every other religion has kind of co-opted it and made it their own. The truth is, and this goes to, I think, all religious traditions, we shouldn't have to ask ourselves that question. What would the Buddha do in this circumstance? What would my teacher do in this circumstance? Right now we do, because our practice is so like still growing. But the more we practice, we don't have to ask ourselves that, because it should be intuitive, right? How to apply compassion in any difficult circumstance eventually becomes intuitive. How to use our wisdom to discern, okay, this is a complicated situation. Not everyone is going to come out on winner. What can I do that'll be of most benefit here? Even if it isn't the most pleasant thing to do or the easiest thing to do, it's the most benefit. What will that be? Will become intuitive. We shouldn't have to ask ourselves, what would my teacher do? But for now, we can. Like, that's actually very powerful. I often do. Like, my teacher, the one I live with, I have a number of teachers. The teacher I live with, everything with him, anytime I'm stressed out about anything, or anytime I have a lot of work to do, or even when I was back in America and I was taking care of my mother through the dying process, every time he talked to me, his only advice would be, relax. Just relax, and then don't worry. Like, that was his advice for everything. And hearing him say it is very useful. Because to hear, what would my teacher do right now? He would not be stressed out. Because being stressed out about this isn't improving the situation, right? And that sounds so simple to say, but how often are we overwhelmed by the habits we've created? Never mind our habits from beginning this time. In this life alone, how many habits have we created that we don't think about, that often overwhelm our emotional response to things, right? We have like Pavlov dogged ourselves into reacting to certain things a certain way. And so just trying to find a way to disrupt that is important. So asking, what would my teacher do right now? If my teacher was faced with this difficult situation, how would they respond? And maybe we don't have the resources to respond the same way our teachers would, but trying to be aware of that is useful. And the more we do that, the more we practice, we don't have to ask that question anymore, because it becomes intuitive. That is the goal, to have an intuitive experience of Dharma all the time, so that we don't have to be actively seeking out Dharma practice. Our Dharma practice is the way we live our life. That is the goal. It's hard. It's really, really hard, because we're so used to following our desire and following our ignorance and searching out worldly benefit only. Because we're taught that's the way to exist in the world. We're taught that's the way to be happy, is to seek out worldly happiness. Right? We are provoked, right? But so then we have to, so then our goal would be, when we're provoked by others, how to know the way to respond to that. Because we've created habits in this life of what is an appropriate response when someone provokes you. And so our goal now is to relearn that isn't an appropriate response. An appropriate response is coming from a Dharma mind. And physically, again, it may be, our physical actions may be the same, but the mental action that goes into it might be different. And so we have to unlearn our habits that say, if someone provokes me, let's say someone insults me, and let's say even different, let's say someone insults me at my job in such a way that their insult to me or their criticism of me might affect my ability to do my job well, because maybe they insult me in front of a team that I work for, will work for me rather, or something, right? So it's not just someone on the street yelling an insult. It potentially has some ramifications. Let's say my worldly instinct is to protect myself, to say they're insulting me, they're causing harm to my livelihood, they're causing all these things. So that's my first instinct, right? And so I need to protect myself, which maybe means I go on the attack, or at the very least, I defend myself and prove them wrong. So that's all focused on my ego. That's not focused on having compassion for their suffering. That's not focused on me wanting to be free from actual suffering. It's me focused on how I'm perceived in a worldly sense. So any of my reactions that come from that mind are going to be seeking out the 8 worldly dharmas. They're going to be seeking out my ego only, my self-cherishing mind only, my mind that says I'm more important than anyone else. Everything has to be for me. So instead, if we can break that habit, and the self-cherishing mind is like a very difficult habit to break, right? Because it motivates so much of our activities. But if we can break that habit, then we can say, this person is lashing out because they are suffering. So, and I recognize I have to respond because I have to do this job, and this has the potential to cause difficulties. But I'm going to respond from a mind that isn't preserving my ego, isn't preserving, my status, but is recognizing that they're suffering and they don't want to be suffering. And so they're acting out. How can I respond in such a way as to not provoke more suffering for them, to not cause more harm, but can also create an equilibrium in this environment where I am protecting my reputation for the benefit of others, not because I care about what people think about me, because their words aren't harming me, right? But because I recognize that my reputation matters for me to do my job. So for instance, similarly, this came up yesterday as well, a lot of the vows that monks have and nuns have to do with how we're perceived by others. Because as a monk or a nun, I'm a representation or representative rather of the Dharma. And so if I do something that can cause someone else to look at me and say, oh, Buddhism obviously is useless because look at how silly this monk acts, then that is an inappropriate way to act, right? So there are vows that say don't act in these certain ways, not because you're concerned with your own image, but you're concerned with the fact that I'm representing something bigger than myself, and my actions have ramifications beyond just myself, or have the potential to have them, right? So my motivation, so the example I brought up yesterday, is we have a number of vows about what sounds we're allowed to make when we eat food, because you think of the traditional monks and nuns, we're begging for their food every day, right? So they would be visiting lay people's houses, you'd invite me into your house and you'd offer me a meal, and you'd sit there with me as I ate my meal. And if I'm eating my meal like a pig, I'm making these noises because I'm so excited for food, then they think, who are these Buddhist jerks? Like, what is going on? They have no class. So then they develop a disrespect for the Dharma, right? And so it doesn't matter what you think of me, but it matters what you think of the Dharma and whether that is deflated because of my actions. So I have vows to help protect that, right? So in the same way, we can use that same mindset if someone engages in harmful action to us in a place where it's important that our reputation matters for us to do our job effectively, whether it be teaching others or whatever it may be. And we have to think of what is our motivation for response? Is our motivation because I care about my ego, or is my motivation because I want to be able to be of service to others, and this could cause a disturbance? So the external actions might be the same, but our motivations wildly different, right? And this is what it means to try to have this intuitive sense of practicing Dharma and not necessarily affecting our external actions. Though I will say most of our external actions would be affected, I think, because we go about things in a more insightful way. But more important is the mind that is motivating how we engage in the world. So what that's doing is it's trying to balance the recognition that we live in the world, so external factors are real, right? Like things that happen to us really happen, whether it be harmful or beneficial. So it's not to say that when someone causes me physical harm, it's just a projection of my mind. It's not, you know what I mean? We often say that our suffering and our happiness come from our mind. That is the truth. My happiness and my suffering come from my mind. I create them myself. But I create them in response to the causes and conditions around me. So my goal is never going to be to eliminate those causes and conditions because I don't have control of them. My goal is to eliminate the way I respond to them blindly and instead respond to them from a Dharma mind that isn't upset when I experience difficult causes and conditions, but uses my wisdom that I've developed through mindfulness to respond in whatever is the most beneficial way. So we have to balance, recognizing that causes and conditions exist. Now, we could say those come from the karma we've created in the past, but even without that understanding, we know that we are often faced with difficult situations because the world is a hard place to live right now, right? So we're going to face obstacles. And even if we don't, we're going to get old and our bodies are going to break down. So even if we live in like a utopian commune, we're still going to get old and get sick and have these physical difficulties that we're going to have to deal with. So we can't avoid those. So we have to find the balance of understanding that our causes and conditions, whatever they may be, whether they be other people, whether they be jobs, work, government, society, or our own, human bodies, those are real. We have to navigate them in a healthy and meaningful way without sacrificing our own happiness to those conditions. Our own happiness, and for that matter, our own sense of unhappiness and suffering, comes from our own mind, regardless of what is happening around us. So our practice, trying to make our spiritual practice infiltrate all of our worldly practice, is part of that recognition. It is a way for us to not be overcome to such an extent that we allow our running around to overwhelm our lives. It's not to say that it is a way to say that no matter how physically busy I may be, I am always going to have space for Dharma. I'm not pushing Dharma out, right? And the important part of that is when we're practicing Dharma, what we're doing is practicing our mind. It's all to benefit our own mind. And yes, we do it for the benefit of others, but the way we experience happiness and contentment is through taming our mind. We're so used to thinking that, again, I don't know the Indian cultural landscape as well as I do in the US, but I know that at least from the part of US and the Christian practitioners that I grew up around, going, especially as a kid, going to church once a week was like a chore. You didn't want to do it, right? And including adults, like having to go do the religious thing once a week, you're like, and you all often, at least in the US, it involved like wearing your fancy clothes because you want to look presentable, right? Yeah, you want exactly your Sunday best. You do all this. And as a kid, that was like, at least for me and the environment I was in, this, I'm not going to say this is true for everyone and for all Christians, but at least the people that I was, the culture that I was part of, it just felt like it was taking away from your life. It wasn't adding to your life, is what it felt like, right? And we run the risk of letting that same thing happen to our Dharma practice. You know, even if, okay, now I have to meditate for 20 minutes. If our meditation is a chore that we get through every day, that's not really beneficial. Or if coming to the temple or watching a teaching online is like a chore or an obligation that we get through, then that's not beneficial. That's not to say that every time we engage in this, we're going to have some sort of, revelation. Like that's like overpromising, right? I definitely am not promising any revelations. But because the truth is, any benefit that any student receives isn't going to be coming from me as the teacher. It's going to be coming from your work, engaging with the teachings. And whoever is giving those teachings, whether they are your teacher or just someone who is a Dharma instructor, they're serving as a conduit for you to engage and to realize those teachings on your own. Like we're here to help you, but you have to do the work. So obviously there are different teachers that are more skilled, that can push you in more meaningful ways, but ultimately it is you working for your own benefit. You get what you give with the Dharma. And since we have been following our worldly minds for so long, in the beginning doesn't mean like our first month. The beginning sometimes can be quite a long time because our beginner minds take a lot of work, right? But in the beginning, it can feel difficult. And I appreciate that. And like samsara is hard. So we have to find ways to not be overwhelmed and not let our Dharma practice become a chore or become an obligation, while still realizing we need it to infiltrate everything we do to be meaningful, right? Which is why I am such a big fan of rejoicing, and which is why I'm such a big fan of anything we can do in small doses that doesn't involve taking up our whole day, So with that in mind, I wanted to do our meditation today. I wanted to do a mindfulness meditation, a very simple one, because I think mindfulness is so important. But I wanted to give one technique that I think is useful. So if we want to try to do, we're going to do a longer practice now, but during the day, I think it's useful to do like 1 minute mindfulness meditation throughout the day, a couple of times a day, like once an hour, if possible. And if that means setting an alarm and once an hour doing, then I think it's really useful. And I want to give a technique to kind of force yourself into a meditative practice, like a very forceful way to get in, that is helpful when you're feeling overwhelmed, right? So let's just take a moment to find a comfortable seat, whatever that may be, whether that is on a cushion or in a chair, however is most comfortable for you. And so the bulk of our practice today is going to be a mindfulness practice. I'll give a little bit more guided visualization near the end. But to get into that mindfulness practice, I want us to practice a different technique than usual. And usually we just settle in, right? So first, let's make sure we're aware of our body. Now, when we're at work, when we're at school, when we're in the real world, we may not be able to sit in this posture, whatever it may be. So we have to learn how to do a scan of our body, make our body or align our body in the most comfortable way possible that is conducive to our practice. But that might mean standing up on the metro, right? It may mean different things. As long as we have the opportunity to engage in proper posture, now we will. But realize that we can meditate without this posture. This posture is beneficial, but it isn't necessary. So our posture now is to have a firm and balanced seat, whatever that may mean. You want to feel connected and stable. You want to have your spine nice and straight. You want to let your hands either rest on your knees or your thighs where they fall naturally, or let them be in a meditative mudra, a meditative hand gesture, which is generally the right hand on top of the left, your thumbs just barely touching, right around the area of your navel, and your elbows out a little bit, like this. So again, whatever feels most natural for you is fine for our purposes today. Let your head rest gently on the top of your spine. You don't tuck your chin down to your chest, but you're also not lifting it up to the sky, letting it follow the natural curve of your upper spine to rest. Make sure all your joints are nice and loose. Nothing is tight, but especially your jaw. Let your jaw hang nice and loose. So your mouth will probably be open a little bit. You can take your tongue and rest your tongue on the hard palate behind your upper teeth. And this does feel a little bit unnatural at first, but it is really useful to prevent saliva from pooling in your mouth and to help the airflow, because you're going to be breathing through your nose mostly, and that helps prevent you from breathing in through your mouth. So even though it is unnatural feeling at first, it's a useful part of the meditative posture. Not so when you're talking all the time, but for those of us that are practicing, it's useful. And then your eyes, you want your eyes to remain half open if possible. Let your gaze follow the end of your nose to the space in front of you. It's not focused on any individual object that's in your line of vision, but unfocused, it just rests on the space in front, following the natural sight line, generally down the end of your nose to a space maybe a meter or so in front of you. And so normally, I'd say let your breath fall into its natural rhythm, because what we are going to focus on is the breath, and we don't need to force the breath. But today, to start, since you want to be more forceful, I'm going to demonstrate what we're going to do, and then we'll do it together after I demonstrate. So what I want to do is I want to breathe in slowly and intentionally. So you breathe in slow and deep. And then once you have the breath, you really try to breathe in deep into your stomach, into your diaphragm. Obviously our breath fills our lungs, but we want to feel our breath pushing down deep into our stomach as you breathe in slow and deep. And then we hold that breath, almost with a little bit of pressure on our diaphragm. And then when we release that breath, we're going to release it quickly in a quick burst. Okay. And then we're going to hold ourselves empty for a moment before repeating. So a demonstration of that would be, and then we repeat. So I want to do that 3 times. And then the reason for doing that practice is no matter how many distractions we have going on in our life, in our world around us right now, being so forceful with our breath can help cut through those distractions. And then once we do that 3 times together, then we let our breath fall into its natural rhythm, and then we'll focus on the natural rhythm of the breath. But so use this forceful breathing exercise as a way to cut through the distractions, that kind of shortcut into your meditation practice, okay? So breathe in nice and slow and deep. Hold. And now breathe out. Hold on empty. Breathe in nice and slow. Hold full. Exerting pressure at your diaphragm. Breathe out forcefully. Hold on empty. And now one more time, breathe in, slow and deep. Really feel the pressure pushing down on your diaphragm. Holding. Now breathe out forcefully. Pushing all the air out on empty. Holding empty. And now let your breath follow its natural rhythm. So you use those 3 breaths to orient yourself, to force yourself into a practice. And now your body knows how to breathe. So you let it breathe whatever is most comfortable. And as it finds its natural rhythm, you allow your awareness to now, since you're no longer actively thinking about the breathing process, your awareness just settles on the breath itself. And you notice the breath breathing in, breathing out. So we'll spend a few moments, or a few minutes rather, just allowing our mindfulness to rest on our breathing. You can label breathing in and breathing out as you do to help focus you. And you can also count your breaths to help focus. Breathing in one, breathing out one. If you lose count, starting over again. In either of these cases, we're not focused on the label itself. Labeling the breath, counting the breath, is just a technique or tool to help us stay focused on the breath itself. So if it's not necessary, then you don't have to use it. The actual object is the breath itself. We're going to notice distractions, that is fine. When we recognize ourselves as being distracted, either by an external noise or sound or sensation, or we find that our minds have wandered, have gotten lost in a story or a daydream, we recognize that distraction. We can label it distraction and return our awareness to our breath. So remember our antidotes, trying to stay focused, remembering the object of our meditation. That's the antidote to forgetting. Then the mind that is seeking out distractions, noticing when we're distracted, that is the awareness or introspection. So those antidotes are always working to help us stay focused on our object of meditation. And when they notice that we're distracted, that when we've forgotten our object, we label that distraction and let it go without judgment. We don't indulge in any sort of judgment over the distraction itself or over ourselves for experiencing that distraction. We just recognize the distraction and then release it, returning our awareness using our active mindfulness to the object of our meditation. We notice that our distractions are mainly us feeling like we've become lost, us feeling lethargic or dull or sleepy. Then we bring more intensity to our awareness. We try to grip our awareness of our breath more tightly. On the other hand, if we notice our distractions are more due to excitement, that we're thinking too many thoughts running in circles around our mind, then we try to relax our grip and ride the breath in a natural way that isn't as tight. So when we recognize distractions, we try to apply the appropriate antidote to keep our mind in balance. Notice any distraction. There's no judgment. In the same way, if you were walking through the forest, notice you're holding a stick that had rotted, you would just let it go. You wouldn't hold on to it anymore. In that same way, when we notice we become distracted, we label it, and then we apply the antidote and let it go. Return our awareness to our object of meditation, to our breathing, without indulging in any judgment. Now I'd like to take a moment to use this opportunity of mindfulness, of focused mind, to analyze some of the activities we've done today and try to see where we engage in activities with a Dharma mind or a worldly mind. So think back to everything you've done up until sitting down in this meditation. From waking up in the morning, getting ready, all of the steps you took before coming here and sitting in this seat. How many of those were motivated or infused with a Dharma mind, a Dharma motivation? And how many of them were infused with a worldly motivation or were mindless, weren't done with any intentionality? So try to go through step by step. There's no one judging you. This is a matter of self-reflection. So we need to be honest with ourselves. So first, looking at all those activities we did with a worldly motivation or out of mindlessness. Looking at those, we don't use those to bludgeon ourselves and think we're a bad person, but we recognize we had missed an opportunity to practice Dharma, to work on our own mind. And so we regret missing that opportunity and develop the wish, the aspiration to be more intentional in the future. So you develop regret, then an aspiration to change. And now look at all of those times, however many they may be, where you did have some Dharma motivation, some spiritual influence over your actions. Recognizing them, develop a strong mind of rejoicing. How incredible that I engaged in Dharma practice. How wonderful that my practice and my worldly life work together. Generate a genuine sense of joy and accomplishment at this. And now let that experience of joy, that rejoicing, settle into your heart. Let it linger there. Let it remain lifting you up, keeping you buoyant, filling you with brightness from the inside out. And without letting go of that experience of joy, you can allow your awareness to return back to the room, to the space in front of you. Thank you. So that's a practice I think is useful to do every day if possible, or as often as possible. For me, I find it most beneficial to have these practices. All of my practices start in mindfulness because I need to be able to tame my mind. And the more you engage in mindfulness practice, the less time you need to do that, right? But it's always useful to do a few minutes of mindfulness practice. I often don't start with the breath. I try to start with visualization of the Buddha because that's a more virtuous object. And that takes a little more effort from me, at least. But so you have to find what feels natural for you. And then I really appreciate these meditations that review what I've done throughout the day or through my practice because they're not abstract. So for me, they're helpful to say, where did I do well? And I can build on those successes. And where do I still need to do some work? You know, it's important not to use these activities or exercises to bludgeon ourselves, but as a way to lift ourselves up, right? So for me, they're very helpful. And that's why I encourage them and I try to teach them. The beginning of our practice, that forceful breathing, I think is something you can do anytime. So especially, I know it is a little loud, so it's maybe not something you want to do like in your cubicle at work if you have people viewing you. You can, the point of it is our normal practice of mindfulness, if we're using the breath as our object, is to let our body follow its natural rhythm of breathing. And you settle in calmly and gently into this practice. But sometimes, especially if we want to do 1 minute just to check up, you need to find a forceful way in, right? And so this isn't the kind of practice you would do every day when you're settling into a nice long practice. That may not be the way to do it.
But if you say, I have 1 minute, I just want to bring my attention here now. I want to cut through all the noise. Something like that is a useful way. And so even if you can't exhale so forcefully because it might be loud, or if your nose is a little stuffed up, you can still be very intentional and just count. You can say, I'm going to inhale for 10 seconds, hold for 10 seconds, exhale for however many seconds, but you can count the seconds. And even that is making it more forceful, right? So you're making it, you're cutting through the white noise a little bit. So especially if you want to try to do a 1 minute meditation every hour, finding something like that that gives you an easier way into the meditation is useful. So let's take a quick break. We have tea, right? So let's just take 10 minutes for tea, and then we'll do a wrap up. And if it improves, then you can. I think in general, when we want to engage in meditation, we want to find a way for our mind. The bigger picture of engaging meditation practice is that we want it to be something that is natural, that we can fall into anytime without needing external things. And so that is an external way to bring us into it. So ideally, we want to be able to settle into meditation without needing those things, right? But they're tools that we use until we can fall into that natural way. So if doing that in every one of your meditations is helpful, then do it, right? It's definitely, that is like an abbreviated or a modified version of, you might have heard of the 9-round breathing, which is a tantric practice that His Holiness teaches in non-tantric environments, which is intentionally breathing through one nostril or the other and doing some visualization. And he often teaches it for the same reason, that by forcing yourself to focus on the breathing, it's more active, and then you settle into a more relaxed way. But this one I find is just a little briefer. So if it's useful in every practice, then do it. I think that's great. Ideally, we want to be in a place where we don't have to, right? That we can just instantaneously focus on whatever we want. But until we get there, use any tools we need. It's the same. I mean, we're not doing any pujas, but when we do pujas, we ring bells, we have all these external accoutrements. That's to help our minds. Like all of the trappings that you see, all of the different the bells and the drums and the peacock feathers, those are all to make our minds, to tame our minds. Because the actual practice, whatever it may be, is an internal practice. We use the external to help make our minds be in the right place to do the internal, right? And so I've seen His Holiness, or excuse me, I haven't seen. A friend of mine was in Dharamsala at Norbalinka Monastery, and His Holiness, my friend was hanging out with some of the monks there, and His Holiness came unannounced to perform exorcism because they had a harmful spirit who was causing them problems in their monastery courtyard. And so they set up his altar, and with it, there's different exorcism rites there exist in Tibetan Buddhism. But a lot of them involve like peacock feathers and skull cups and all of these ritual elements. And His Holiness just pushed them all to the side. And he just meditated on compassion. He didn't need any of those external things because his meditation was so powerful. So that's where we want to be, right? That's our goal, is to be in a place where we can fall into any meditation with no problem. But until we're there, use whatever techniques gets us there, Okay, so let's take a break. We'll have some tea, 10 minutes, and then we'll be back to do a wrap up. Yeah.
Buddha used to say that God is not important, for self-realization, for nirvana. He said we should with our self-endeavor for, getting nibbana. And what is the purpose of all these rituals exactly?
So again, the rituals, we do the different rituals are ways to access our mind and to overcome all of the afflictions we've created in our mind. So the rituals are tools to help us. If we don't need the rituals, then we don't need them. And the more you progress in the path, you often don't need those rituals. But for us, since we have so many obstacles, the rituals are just like implements to help us get into a mental practice in an easier way. So that's what we do. But ideally, you're right, we shouldn't need them. So the more we practice, then we don't rely on the external things. We rely on the external rituals now because our minds are so all over the place. So it's helpful sometimes. But then,
for example, whenever I try to sit for meditation, if there's any commotion outside, anything, I'm easily disturbed.
Yeah. So then at first, you try to create a situation where you don't have the obstacles. So try to find a quiet place. Try to close windows. You can even turn on a white noise machine sometimes.
I make my phone from silent.
Yeah. So we first need to use external things to aid us. And then as our practice gets stronger, we don't need those external things. But we can have some more questions after the break. I want to give everyone a chance to, and those of us online, quick break. So just 10 minutes. So it's 12:05 now. So we'll be back at 12:15 to continue.
Oh, that's okay.
It's come long time. I think for a moment.
Okay, so as I was saying, welcome back. Hope everyone is able to stretch their legs. We only have a little bit of time left, so I thought I would wrap up, but also leave space for some questions. One of the things that came up during the break is mentioned that sometimes when your boss calls, your instant reaction is one of frustration, right? Or even before your boss says anything, you say, oh, what do they need me to do now? Like there are certain people, you know, when I see a certain name ringing on my phone, I feel the same way, right? Like, oh, what is this going to be, right? Because we've created these habits of them. Before they even say anything, they could just be saying, hi, how are you? Are you having a good day? We don't know, but we've created these habits that we automatically lead with a negative mind, right? So the way we try to respond to that is be aware that that is a case where we are setting ourselves up for failure. It doesn't matter what's going to be on the other side of that phone call. We've already created a negative atmosphere, an unhelpful atmosphere, right? So what we want to try to do is actively notice when we're doing that and try to step back and say, try to always lead with a mind that says, this is an opportunity for me to practice patience and practice compassion. Those are the two most important things in that environment. Say, become aware that I'm reacting out of my emotional habit and not out of any wisdom, right? I'm just acting almost like an animal instinct, right? And that animal instinct is trying to protect my ego or my self-cherishing mind. So instead, develop a mind of patience that says, no matter what difficulties are coming my way, I can get through those difficulties, right? So develop a mind of patience that is content to bear difficulties. And then develop a mind of compassion. So this person, whether they're just calling to be nice to me, or they're calling to bother me, or they're calling to give me more work to do, recognize that what they're doing is they are a suffering sentient being who are doing their best to find happiness, even if they're going about it the wrong way, even if they think causing me difficulty is going to bring them happiness. So have compassion for them and say they are doing their best, even if it's not a good job. So try to develop the wish that says, I wish they weren't suffering. I wish that they had happiness. And whatever they ask of me right now, I'm going to do my best to do it with a mind that develops patience and isn't overwhelmed by unhappiness. And then you answer the call.
So is it like using affirmations?
It's like using affirmations a little bit, but the difference is the affirmation, you don't want it to stop on your lips, right? You actually want to be transforming your mind, you know? And so there are different affirmation practices. Even Lama Zopa Rinpoche has suggested some, my teacher has suggested some before. The point of affirmations is that they're easy to remember and they can quickly help us get into an appropriate mindset, right? So when we experience, for instance, a regular difficulty, the first step is being aware of it. So even being aware that when this person calls, I have a negative reaction. That's because I've created this habit of doing it. So that's the first step, being aware of our own emotional landscape in a meaningful way. And that's hard because we're so used to doing things without thinking about it that we aren't aware of our emotions until our emotions are already overwhelming us and we're acting out of frustration, right? So the first step is being aware. And that's already difficult, but we've already done that step to a little bit. And then before you answer that phone call, say, okay, I'm not going to react out of an emotional reaction. Instead, I'm going to develop patience and I'm going to develop compassion. And I'm going to respond to the situation with those two priorities as my main goals. And it's difficult, right? It's not going to be easy, especially at first, because we've created these habits so long. But the more you do it, then it becomes second nature, you know? But as we were also saying, and we were talking to another student during the break, that doesn't mean you let yourself become like an emotional punching bag or you let yourself become a doormat that people just take advantage of, right? So being compassionate to others doesn't mean that people can do whatever they want and you're just going to suck it up and be the last of the line for everything. But it means that whatever you are doing, even if you're standing up for yourself or standing up for others, you're not doing it with a mind of anger. You're not doing it with a mind of resentment or a mind of frustration. You're doing it with a mind that says, I want all sentient beings to be happy. I don't want any sentient being to suffer. Now, maybe there are other objectives that I live in the world. I have to fulfill those objectives, whatever they may be. whether that is dealing with your coworkers, whether that is being in line at a store, whatever it may be. We have to fulfill those worldly objectives as long as we're living in the world. Or you can, move to a monastery and not worry about them like me. Most people don't have that luxury. You have to go about your lives. So your external actions, they need to be motivated by a mind of compassion and a mind of wisdom, right? Compassion and wisdom are the two things that are going to bring us to Buddha. What the wisdom does is the wisdom analyzes the situation and says, what is the best thing I can do in the situation? What is the best opportunity I have to help myself and help others? And then the compassion is then like the fuel that allows you to do that in a meaningful way. But wisdom also helps you learn how to apply compassion, because there's such a thing as foolish compassion, right? If you see a lot of people who are homeless and who are hungry, and you just, take handfuls of dal and throw it at them, that's not going to be helpful to them, right? You may think, oh, I'm trying to relieve their suffering, but you're not doing it in a smart way, right? So you need that wisdom to say, how do I apply my compassion to this specific situation? And then depending on that situation, you'll find a different way. And it may not be perfect at first. You may try to do one thing and it may not work. So then you have to try something else. But both of them, whatever you do, is going to be strengthened by having a regular practice of observing your mind, of being aware when you're acting without thinking, and being aware of what it means to actively cultivate compassion and mindfulness, and use those as springboards to develop wisdom, right? So you have to do the work on your own before you're put in the difficult situations. When you're really trying to accomplish single-pointed concentration, called calm abiding, the first advice they give you is abandon your homeland. There's a number of steps they give. The first one is abandon your homeland, go to an isolated place, right? Because they recognize that when you're in the middle of a city, when you're around people that you love or people that you hate, whether you're around people that you have relationships with, you have all these obstacles to practice, right? Because there's distractions all over the place, and your desire and your attachment and your anger are constantly they're constantly flaring up. So if you really want to focus on your mind, you go somewhere where you have none of those distractions. You create as positive an environment as possible, and you use that to develop your mind. And then once you've done that work, then you can go back to the city. Then you can go back to your regular environment, and you're able to concentrate and meditate no matter what distractions there are. They say if you've achieved actual single-pointed concentration, you can be in the middle of the busiest market town and still instantaneously focus on your object of meditation without any effort, because you've already developed that muscle. But to develop the muscle, you don't have to, but it's beneficial to give yourself as conducive an environment as possible, right? Which is why when you meditate every day, like I said, meditating at work or in your workplace is hard, but you don't start there. You want to try to have a regular everyday practice where you can be at your home, where you can have some sort of quiet, where you can maybe close the windows, where you can create a sense of calm and serenity for yourself. Then you do that practice there. That creates a habit. So then when you're at work or when you're in your everyday life and you don't have all of those positive conditions, you've already got a memory. You've already got some sort of muscle memory, right? To say, okay, I know what mindfulness feels like because I've done it before in good or an easy environment. Now this is difficult environment. Let me try to rely on that muscle memory to bring at least the flavor of mindfulness back to this practice, right? So you don't start in the deep end. You start in the shallow end. You build up the muscle. And as you get better at it, then you apply it to more difficult circumstances, right? So that's why we have to have a regular everyday practice. And that practice, as I mentioned in the very beginning of our class today, we want to try to balance having what I talk about as a long-term practice goal and a short-term practice goal. So our short-term is what we can do every single day in our everyday life that doesn't involve sitting on a cushion. It's how we let the Dharma infiltrate all of our activities. And so I suggested, right, making sure you repeatedly set a strong intention that you're doing things for the benefit of all sentient beings, not just for your own worldly happiness. Make sure you are constantly developing a mind of compassion, that everything you're doing it with the recognition that other sentient beings are suffering and that you wish they weren't suffering, and their actions of harm are almost always caused from their own suffering, right? And then rejoicing in those things that you do well, in that virtue that you're able to accomplish. Try to do those three things all day long in all of your small activities. And then when you have time in the evening or in the morning, that's when you do a lengthier meditation practice that gives you the fuel. So during the day, you can do those little ones, right? You have to find that balance. And so that's why you need a long-term practice that says, this is what I'm going to do every day. This is my long-term goals. And then these are the small things that I can do during my day to try to make sure my mind is aligned with the teachings of the Buddha, with a spiritual practice, and not aligned with a worldly practice. You know, so you have to have both those things at the same time, the small view and the big view.
How long should the lengthy meditation at the beginning of the day or the end of the day should be? Like half an hour, 1 hour?
So when you're beginning as a meditator, what they suggest is when you, well, first off, you want to create a practice that you can do every day, right? So you don't want to do it for a week and then be burned out and tired and then stop doing it. And so you want to be realistic. And I also say when you meditate, at the end of your meditation session, you want to feel like you could still meditate a little bit more, right? So you don't like, you know, when you go to the gym, if you're trying to build muscle and you're doing reps, you're supposed to go until exhaustion. You're supposed to go your last rep until you literally can't do anymore, because that's how you build muscle, right? That's not the way this works. If you go till exhaustion meditating, so when you finish meditation, you're like, oh, I'm done. Now I need to go eat a sundae and watch TV. Then you've kind of gone backwards, right? So you want to always have a little bit of fuel left in the tank. So you still have a joyful, buoyant mind. So it's going to be different for different people. So at the beginning, what I often recommend is if you're brand new to do a daily meditation, start with 10 minutes, right? Start with 10 minutes. And then after a week or after 2 weeks, if you've been able to do 10 minutes every day and that feels comfortable and you don't feel like exasperated or tired at the end, then go to 15 minutes. Because, you know, we have been in samsara creating bad habits for so long that we can take our time. You know, we don't have to do everything overnight. So start with 10 minutes a day. Now, if you get to a point where you're doing up to an hour, then you can try to do much more complicated or in-depth meditation practices. It's hard to find time for most of us, even me who lives at a monastery, to find an hour every day just to meditate is difficult, right? So, yeah, I mean, it depends on how we define meditation, right? And I have all the other practices and prayers and rituals that I do every day. But just to sit and do nothing but sitting for an hour is difficult to find time, at least for me. Maybe other people's lives have more space than mine does. So you steal little moments when you can. But so start with shorter sessions, because that way you don't want to be tired of them. You want to build up the muscle. And when you feel comfortable with that, then you can extend.
How do you realistically do yourself like what you're doing? You know, your mundane jumps. That this is for the benefit of the same others. You can connect it with others.
Yeah. So there are a couple of different ways to do. One of the things Lama Zopa would teach us, he has a little booklet that gave these essentially like these affirmations. So like when you're washing dishes or washing laundry, you think, I'm actually washing out all of the stains of the afflicted minds. And so I'm not just doing this worldly activity of cleaning up this worldly thing, but I'm purifying the minds of all suffering sentient beings and washing away the afflictions, right? And so in that way, obviously you're not doing that, right? Like washing dishes isn't the same thing as purifying your mind. But what you're doing is aligning your mind to an active Dharma practice, to a virtuous Dharma practice. So you're using this opportunity of some boring rote physical activity to align your mind with Dharma and to make your mind inspired by Dharma. So even when you're doing boring everyday activities, you think of it that way. The other way is, depending on what those activities are, you think that I'm doing this thing so others don't have to. It may be a job that other people don't want to do. So you're relieving the burden of others by doing this thing like this. So it depends on what the worldly activity is. But if it's something that you're doing that others might be doing, you say, I'm going to take this mild suffering of these household chores upon myself so others don't have to, you know? And even that is a very limited type of happiness, right? But it is you working for others. So in that way, what you're doing is you're trying to constantly align your mind with a spiritual practice. And so we're not fooling ourselves in saying that by me doing the dishes, I'm actually liberating sentient beings from suffering. But what we're doing is this is an opportunity where I could be lining my mind up with virtue. Or it's an opportunity where I could turn my mind off and do nothing. Like a what? Yeah, exactly, right? Is you're using it in that way. So that if you expect results from it, then that's kind of going in the wrong direction. Lama Zopa there's a booklet, I'm sure we might have a copy of it, that gave these little affirmations that you can do with all of your activity. So when you put on your belt, you say, I'm putting on the belt of morality that'll keep me contained and keep my actions pure. When you close a door, when you walk through a doorway, you say, I'm opening the door to the upper realms and I'm closing the door to the lower realms, right? So it's all these affirmations that seem silly a little bit, but what they're doing is they're not believing that by saying that or thinking that you're changing reality, but they're making you more accustomed to Dharma. So then when an actual situation arises when you can do one of these things, that's your natural instinct, right? You're trying to rewire your habits to always be aligned with Dharma. And so sometimes these silly little affirmations do that, you know?
Like, for example, if my job, like how it is, normally you was sitting on laptop and working the entire day. So how should I think of it?
Yeah, so when you're doing your job, then you can also think, so what is the goal of doing a worldly job? Like, why do I do this? Do I do this just to earn money? Do I do this because I want to be able to buy nice things? Or do you think in the bigger picture, okay, I want to be of service to other sentient beings, whatever way is possible. In order to do that, I have to have food and shelter, because without food and shelter, it'd be very difficult for me to engage in my spiritual practice, right? And in order to have food and shelter, I have to go do this boring job. But with this boring job or exciting job, whatever it is, but I have to do this job because it's giving me an opportunity to earn a living, which is then giving me an opportunity to support myself and be of service to others. It's giving me money that I can use to support other positive endeavors. So even if the job itself, it doesn't have anything related to Dharma, you say, why am I doing this? Do I just want nice money to buy nice clothes and to have a big house and to buy a new fancy TV? Or am I doing this because I want to be of service to others? And I know that the world we live in requires me to have some sort of, or doesn't require, but having money and some sort of assets makes my life easier in this world. So by making my life easier in this way, I have more opportunity to do other things. And that motivation can help.
If I want to have a Dharma mind at the same time, I want to work toward my goals. How is that possible?
Well, again, you have to look at your goals. And are your goals only to be popular in this life and to have happiness in this life only? Then we'd say those aren't Dharma goals. Instead, if you say my goals are to succeed in this life, in whatever way that may be, how can that be something that allows you to engage in more Dharma practice? So you have to try to make sure your goals and the motivation behind your goals lines up with the spiritual path.
Like if my goal is to earn this much amount of money in this particular time.
Okay, so then if your goal is to earn a certain amount of money, then you have to ask yourself, why do I want to earn that money? Is it because I want to be wealthy and I just want to be able to buy whatever I want? Is it because I want people to think that I'm really skilled at my job and I'm popular and I'm intelligent? Or is it because I recognize that having a more comfortable lifestyle will give me an opportunity to be of more service to others? So in either case, you're working towards the goal of getting a raise, of doing a good job, of earning more money, but the reason for it is different, right? One reason is purely selfish, and one reason is saying, I can use greater resources to be of more service to others. And so then if you realign your goals, then working towards that goal can become part of your spiritual practice, like that. Yeah.
So the beginning of this, we started discussing about the compassion.
Yeah.
So I have a question related to that. So some people are actually cheating us and hurting us. So you are saying like even though they are hurting us, we should not retaliate. We should not. So it's like we should not show our anger only asking us to go and attack or do something bad, right? So instead of that, if we try to follow the compassion or try to go kindness, but the thing is, if you are showing that, they don't realize, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can show compassion and go back, but they repeat the same mistake again, right?
Yeah.
With others.
Yeah, that's true.
Until something happened to them, they won't realize, right?
That's true. So the difficulty in showing compassion in a world that is so, it seems against compassion right now. That's like the social politics of our world. It's like compassion does not lead the way. So first off, we have to remember, in the big picture, all of our practice is to tame our own mind. So if you are acting towards me in a harmful way, and I develop compassion towards you, ideally, that would be benefiting you. But really, the most important thing is to make sure my mind isn't overwhelmed by anger or attachment, right? Because that way, that's what I can control most, is my mind. And the belief that if I act towards you in a fierce or wrathful way, it's going to cause you to change your attitude is a total fabrication, right? Quite often, if I react towards you in that way, you just become angrier. and it doesn't solve anything. It makes it's adding fuel to a fire. So first off, we have to recognize that our practice is to tame our mind. I don't have the ability to tame other people's minds, right? Now, I have some indirect ability. And obviously, if someone is acting harmfully to me, that I know that some actions might exacerbate that harm, or some might put it down. So there is some things I can do. But my main priority is to work on my own mind. So compassion, when it starts, isn't about making them feel better. Even though I want them to be free of suffering, what compassion is doing is making sure my mind is aligned with benefiting others and not harming them. Now, with that said, that's where wisdom comes in and says, what is the most appropriate thing for me to do in this situation? If I allow myself to be taken advantage of over and over and over again, is that going to benefit them in any way or benefit me? Or is it going to encourage them to continue harming others and harming me? And if you think that if your wisdom, not your gut reaction, but your wisdom says, look, this isn't helping anyone by letting myself be taken advantage of, then the compassionate act is to take some sort of action to stop that from happening, right? So the compassion might be standing up for yourself. It might be taking some sort of action that says this needs to end because what is harmful. That could be the compassionate act. But so first you have to develop the mind that says they're suffering, they're acting out of suffering, and I wish they weren't suffering. And then you combine that with the wisdom that says, what is the most efficacious thing I can do? That is not reacting out of anger or out of ignorance, but is acting out of compassion, even if it might mean standing up for yourself and being forceful, right? And so in the end, the action you take might look the same from the other person's point of view. They may not experience it any differently. But from your side, one of those actions is engaging in your anger and allowing your anger to grow stronger. And one is engaging in wisdom and compassion and letting that grow stronger. So the difference from your side is wildly different. And your own personal progress is wildly different, even if the other person doesn't experience it differently, right? So that is the important thing, right? And now I will say there are some cases where you don't have to react to every time someone harms you. Every time someone takes advantage of you, you don't have to immediately react, right? And you don't have to put everyone in their place. No, again, you don't want people to continue causing harm, and you don't want them to harm others. So it might be compassionate to stop them. But it doesn't mean every single instance. Our gut reaction is every single instance, the balance has to be balanced. That's not always the case. So that's where the wisdom comes in. It says, okay, this case, I don't have to fight back on this. It's okay that they took advantage of me. That's not great, but it's happened. And me retaliating isn't going to stop them from doing it in the future or isn't going to be improving anything. So not every time is going to require standing up for yourself in that way, right? So you have to find that balance, and that only comes from wisdom and practice. The most important thing is that we're not reacting blindly, that we're being very conscious, and that is coming from a place of compassion.
Just one example. For example, we're standing in a queue.
Yeah.
Someone breaking the queue.
Yeah.
Right? So you can be silent.
Yeah.
You can allow them to they silently come inside, or else we can be silent like why you're coming, or we can ask why you're coming inside. So which is appropriate?
Look, it's going to depend on so many external factors, right? It depends on where you are at the queue. Depends on what's going on. If they come in and they ignore everyone, if they fight their way in, you don't know, right? The truth is, we never know what's going on in someone else's mind. So before we act, we have to recognize that what it appears they're doing and the way I experience their action may be totally different from what is going on in their mind. So usually, but we don't know that. We don't know. They could have a dying family member at home and they have to rush to. Like they might have just received a phone call, or never mind that. They might have just received a phone call that they've lost their job, or that all their money that was invested is now gone. We have no clue what is happening in their life, right? That is then somehow encouraging their actions. Now, that doesn't mean that's an excuse for them to behave poorly, but it just means we don't know what's going on, right? So before we act, we should recognize that I don't know what's going on in the situation. I know my experience of the situation, which is valid. My experience is valid, but it is often not the whole picture. So then before we act, at least acknowledge that. And then you have to look at the situation and say, okay, what is the most appropriate thing to do in this situation? And sometimes they cut in line, it's already happened. Fighting it isn't going to change things, especially if it's a stranger that you're never going to see again. If you were at a place and you did something inappropriate, let's say you cut a line. For whatever reason, you're in a real rush, you feel it's valid, you cut a line. Some stranger you've never met before chastises you and criticizes you. Do you think that is going to then cause you in the future to not do it again? Probably not for most of us, right? And if you've already done it, like, so you have to say, like, what is the benefit is this going to be? Maybe it will benefit, but it's all about, that's why we have to develop wisdom. And the wisdom works with our compassion to say, what is the most appropriate thing in this circumstance? And we're not always going to get it right. Like, we're not always going to get it right. Sometimes our anger is going to get the better of us, or sometimes we think we're doing something compassionate and it ends up that we just set ourselves up for failure. And when that happens, then you're honest. You say, okay, I tried. That wasn't the right way to do it. I did my best. I learned, and now I'm going to try to do something different in the future. You know, the most important thing is that we've been following these negative minds and these bad habits for so long that we don't think about it. So even taking a moment to think about it and to say, whatever I'm going to do, I'm doing it intentionally. I'm not blindly reacting out of an emotional mind. I'm doing something very intentionally for a reason. That right away is a huge step forward, because it's at least you trying to take control of your mind as opposed to your negative emotions taking control of you, right?
It's a practice which you are saying you have to be followed towards the day, because sometimes we follow for some time. After we go home, there we go, what is the situation? We become like a natural habit. Like naturally how we used to talk and like stressed, and so it's like even all the situation we try to need to follow. Like every day we need to follow throughout the day.
Yeah, I think we need to do our
Even
best.
if someone is not seeing, like we are just one to one. So I know this person very well. So I can take advantage. Like, okay, I can be not to be kind or something. Usually you do it with family, right?
Yeah.
Like if they're not doing something wrong, if they're doing something wrong, you try to not to be kind to them. Like just shout, right? Like I'm saying not exactly shout.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think the important thing is when you develop a practice, what that helps you do is, no matter what environment you find yourself in, you're always asking yourself, what is the most beneficial thing I can do? Beneficial for others and for myself both. And depending on the circumstance, sometimes you have to prioritize one over the other. Sometimes you say that if I act in this way, it might be most helpful for them, but it'll cause me incredible, long-lasting distress and difficulty. So I have to protect myself first. Sometimes you don't have to do that. Sometimes what's beneficial for them is first. I will say that when you've been away, so for instance, me living in India for so long, when I go back to America, which all of the old habits I used to have that I thought I've gotten away from, you get back into a different environment again. You say, oh, wait, there's still all these things coming back. So putting yourself in different environments is actually really helpful because you see how much progress you've made. You might have made progress when you're in the perfect conditions, and then it's more difficult in other ones, right? But so that's useful because then you know that. Then you say, oh, okay, I thought I had done really well here. Maybe only to 50%, not 100%. So that's more work I can do. So it's useful when those things come up, right? But the main question is, what will be of most benefit right here? Is it most benefit for me to do X, Y, or Z? Like what is going to help not just me, but the whole situation? And you have to find that balance. And that comes from knowing your mind. And that comes from not reacting blindly, right? Okay, let's
And we discussed earlier that rituals, they are not like extremely necessary for nibbana, for liberation, or for practice. While they are helpful, what exactly do you mean by the fact they are helpful?
So there are different types of rituals. From the basic point of view, what we're saying is that our habits are so ingrained that using external things to help break those habits is useful. So for instance, okay, here's a worldly example, but people have become addicted to their phones, right? And they spend so much time scrolling on their phones. So some people then download an app which controls their screen time. So once their phone has been on for more than 2 hours, it turns off right away and says you have to take a 15-minute break or whatever, right? There are screen time apps that help you. So what that's doing is saying, hypothetically, you should have the self-control yourself to do this, but for whatever reason you don't. So here is an external thing to nudge you, to push you in the right direction. And eventually, once you get into the habit, you don't need that nudge anymore. So many of our external rituals are the same way. That says our minds are so focused on the negative minds, on ignorance and on anger and on attachment, that actually developing a calm mind, developing a mind of love and compassion is just difficult for us. Or it's easy to do in brief moments, but continuing it for a long time is difficult. So there are all sorts of rituals we do, including sometimes we offer prayers to the Buddhas that are asking the Buddhas to help us. Now we know the Buddhas can't actually give us realizations. We said the Buddhas aren't able to eliminate all of our negativities or transfer realizations to us. If they could, we'd all be Buddhas. If the Buddhas could remove our suffering, then none of us would suffer. They don't have that power. We still make requests from the Buddhas to do that for us. But what we're doing by making those requests, by engaging in those practices, is opening our mind up to the possibility of us becoming Buddhas, right? So all of those things are just like little tools to help push us along the way. And so especially, for those of us, this is my experience, for those of us that are reticent to engage in any sort of ritual because we think, I don't need this, then it's really important to actually do it. Because we've come into the habit says, I don't need this thing. This isn't part of my practice. That right away is creating a roadblock. So then, if that's your mindset, it's useful to try to practice some ritual. And then after you do it for a few months, you say, okay, maybe I was right. Maybe this wasn't helpful. But at least I didn't go in there with this mindset that says, I know more than everything else. These traditions have been around for thousands of years, right? The development of some of these rituals have existed in cultures for thousands of years. So to think that I am above all of this is like a somewhat arrogant way to approach it. But you may be right. You may not need any of those things, right? But it's useful to actually give your full effort into it. And then you analyze and say, okay, this wasn't useful for me, or this was distracting for me. This didn't help my mind. But I gave it a full effort and I've seen this wasn't useful. And so instead of saying this is a bad thing, I say this isn't useful for me. I'm just going to put it on the side. Maybe in the future it will be useful. Maybe in the future I'll find out that this is going to be something that is helpful for me. But right now, it's causing a distraction. So, but that's one of the main rules of ritual, is to give us just another tool to deal with our mind that's constantly running around in circles, Okay, I think we're going to end there. We've already gone. Oh.
The book that you were referring to by Captain Amsakrimche.
Okay.
It's called Cultivating Mindfulness and Bodhicitta in Daily Activities.
Okay.
That's the name of the booklet. It's available in the FPMT shop.
Yeah, so the Cultivating Mindfulness of Bodhicitta in Daily Activities, if you go to
.org.
That's the FPMT shop, it's a different website.
Yes.
But anyway, if you search for FPMT shop online, it's a free download, a free PDF, but it all has to go through their shop interface. So you have to add it to your cart and then do a checkout, but it's a free download PDF. You don't have to pay for it. So that's Cultivating Mindfulness of Bodhicitta and Everyday Activity is that text. Yeah, with the daily affirmations. Yeah. There are a lot, at this point, FPMT has made all of their prayers available for free. So, but it still runs through their FPMT store. So you have to go to the storefront, but there are a lot of prayers and practices available for free download.
What about meditation practice? There are many.
There are some guided meditations there as well. Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, but there are definitely some. If you look through, find some. Okay, I think we're going to end it here. That we've gone about 20 minutes longer than usual, which is fine. I'm very happy to. But let's end it here. Let's do very quick dedication prayers. So if we are in this gold book, we'll go to page 36. And we'll offer the 2 verses of dedication in English, and then we will offer the short long life prayer for His Holiness. So the purposes of these prayers is realizing that by coming together today, we've generated some merit, some positive karma, and we dedicate that karma to benefit all sentient beings. And the way we do that is we say that the way I can benefit all sentient beings most is if I very quickly become a Buddha. So I'm dedicating this merit that it might ripen on others, and that it may also ripen in my quick realization of Buddhahood so that I might be a benefit to others. That is the goal. So we dedicate our merit in that way. In that way, our practice is sealed by having a strong motivation in the beginning and have a virtuous motivation in the beginning and a virtuous dedication at the end. It makes our practice more complete. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Excellent. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You said your studies start for next month.
No, we started. Yeah, this week. It seemed like a very long holiday, but that is in part because usually during that holiday I travel, and this time I didn't travel. I stayed at home to do my own work. But then as a result, I was like, wow, these holidays, this is stretching on and on. But now that the holiday is done, you're like, oh, we're back in it, which is very exciting. So